All right, it is your Pratt Pack here at the home office in Monaca, wishing that I was in East Liverpool just about every single day. Why? Because that little place in Eastern Ohio has meant so much to me for decades. And I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the reason. The radio station on the AM dial, 1490. So my journey began many years ago while jogging not too far from here. I suffered a debilitating injury. I was hit by a vehicle. So what happened, it threw my career, well, into a spin. And when it was all said and done, I basically was off the air for months, wondering what my next job would be, even considering doing something else. But in the end, because of a friend, I found myself back on the air. But this time, at the end of the yellow brick road. And that's why I always say there is no place like home. And if I'm not in my home of Beaver County, that is my adopted home. And of course, the reason, because of what began there on the airwaves many years ago from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., WOHI. I've worked a lot of places in my life at every level, from local radio to the commercially first operating radio station in the history of broadcasting, November 2nd, 1920, KDK, where I still am to this day. And I've even done network television. But the 20 years that I spent in East Liverpool at WOHI were truly the best of my life. So much so that the second 10 years I juggled multiple jobs, multiple television shows, personal appearances, and of course KDK radio full-time, because I just wanted to stay there. And because of Tim Brooks and Jennifer Barrett at the East Liverpool Historical Society, I come to you to talk about WOHI because it means so much to me. And I truly wish that I could be there in East Liverpool with all of you right now. But better yet, because of technology, I have this opportunity to take a stroll down memory lane with you to talk about why that radio station was so important to that community. And sadly, it's not in the heart of East Liverpool anymore, but for those of us who know East Liverpool, we know WOHI. So because of that friend, Brad Baker, who was doing an air shift there, and we had worked a short time together before in Western Pennsylvania, I went to East Liverpool and rolled the dice. And it came up every time a winner, because the moment I turned on that microphone and that on-air light came on, it was like the light came on what community was all about. From the local paper, the Evening Review, to, that local mayor, the local people that became my friends, the women of my life who I was fortunate and blessed to hold some hands and stroll down the streets of that community. And of course, the people, my co-workers, that I'm going to tell you about in just a moment. But the funeral director, Frank Dawson, who met me in the alley one day right behind WOHI, adjacent to his funeral home, is the reason why that recipe for success is still as rich and delicious today, all these years later. So what was WOHI? If you've ever seen the TV series WKRP, that is WOHI. Friendly people who, in radio, sad to say, most times the careers are short-lived because everybody, especially on air, is looking to go to the next level. But I just fell in love with that place, and hey, if I didn't finally get so busy in the year 2000, I'd probably somehow, some way still be on the air there today. Now, of course, many of you know it because of the Pickle, the FM dial 92.1, which simulcasts the WOHI music and information that you hear today. But of course, back then, it wasn't just WOHI. We had an incredible FM station, 104.3 WELA, which is now a Froggy brand. And back then, it was playing country music too. One of the reasons why I still love it to this day. And of course, when we were doing those concerts at Ponderosa Park, it really was some cool stuff. But back to WOHI. I started off doing the 7 to 10 shift, and just playing vinyl, 45 records, 2 turntables, and me, and that incredible fishbowl studio downtown with those huge windows that people would walk by throughout the night and peek into the window. And those faces became the places and memories that I'm going to share with you today. They did all kinds of amazing things there, including broadcast Paul Harvey's 15 minutes of news at noon, the rest of the story a little after 3, truly one of the greatest journalists in the history of broadcasting. And yes, because of Paul Zender, more on him in a moment, the Z-Man, he told me a story when Paul Harvey actually was in East Liverpool, came into that studio, used the Associated Press and the UPI, United Press International machine, and as it clicked away, he just ripped and read whatever the big stories were of the day, and his national radio show was live in East Liverpool. Pretty cool stuff, right? But there were other people in that community who had equal talent, in my opinion, and were far from the national radio microphone, although they could have done it. A guy who operated a tugboat in Wellsville, Ohio, on the mighty Ohio River, was a broadcaster of yesteryear who decided to get out and earn some real money. And he would come in every single weekend because people still wanted him to voice their commercials, like the legendary Ogilvy's Department Store, which was the first place I ever visited in East Liverpool on a Thursday night because of a young woman from Midland in 1979, and the magic had begun. And who would have ever thought years later I would be on the air there? But back to Stu Wilson. I used to watch him and marvel at his talent, how he would use a newspaper ad from the Evening Review to do a 60-second commercial for Ogilvy's. And he may have prepped earlier, but not when I was with him, because he would let me get into that recording studio and stand over his shoulder. And as the second hand on that giant clock swept 1 minute, he nailed it every time. And to this day, I believe it's a gift that I have because of him teaching me, whether he knew it or not. But everyone, from the morning show man who was a legend in broadcasting, who became a huge star in Youngstown, decided to slow down and come back and raise his children and be with his wife. We were fortunate to have Jerry Faulkner, otherwise known as Jerry Graham, on the air. And he too, a guy that used to love to lift weights, he loved his Camel cigarettes, and he was one of the coolest people on the planet. And yeah, in those Argyle sweaters, he would always be looking so dapper, and he was so incredibly talented on the air that to this day, I don't know if anybody I've ever met who is that good. It was like a great neurosurgeon using a scalpel. What he could do on the air was second to none. He too taught me about the trials and tribulations of broadcasting, and I explained to him how I lost my job because I was hit by this vehicle and I was crushed because it was the first time I kind of was rejected. He said, look, in this business, get used to it. And yeah, sadly along the way, I've seen it happen more times than not. But that's the challenge of being in the business of a competitive nature such as broadcasting. You get knocked down, but as Sylvester Stallone said in one of those Rocky movies, it's not about how hard you hit, but it's about how you take a hit and keep moving forward. And there were others there as well, including Paul Zender, who I believe if Paul Zender is alive today and in this business, they could have not kept him at WOHI because he would have been a lightning rod that some station, television or radio, would have had him broadcasting around the country. And with the internet and podcasting, he was doing that long before they coined the phrase, because he always basically said what he believed and what he felt. And believe me, there were a few lightning bolts because of it. But he was an incredible journalist who used to type with 2 fingers and rapid fire could crank out story after story after story. And who will never forget, on the scene, he would actually go out and broadcast from news stories. And he too took me under his wing and taught me so much as we would sit in that newsroom in between newscasts, and I, like a sponge, just could not get enough. So, what about the sales end of this business? It's because of people like Ron Offenbaugh, Bob Berbick, and Mike Smith today, and Jay Michaels, that I still love a good sale. It's all about the dollars that make sense to keep the product on the air. And you know, back in the day, Liverpool was such a thriving community that many of those salesmen in the 80s didn't even have to get into their car. They could have a little breakfast, a little lunch at the elite diner, and basically make a sale and come back and make our incredible owner, my hero, Frank Mangano, and a lot on him in just a moment. But because of a general manager, Bernie Brobst, he too gave me the opportunity to really get involved, like doing play-by-play for the first time when my legendary partner and my dear friend, Jerry Stovall, who was selling radio advertising at that time, came in looking dapper, always with his jeans and cowboy boots and that herringbone sport jacket, leaned over the console and said, I guess you and I are doing the East Liverpool football game Friday night. He said, I'll be the analyst, you do play-by-play. I said, Jerry, I've never done that before. He said, you can handle it, and I did. And we were off to the races for the next 20 years, doing just about anything in the business of play-by-play. From Bill Booth football to every high school team in the region, from the OVAC to the Tri-County League, and of course, basketball, even baseball and wrestling with the legendary Jim Hopple, former state champion from the mid-50s at Oak Glen High School. I did Christmas parades, you name it, I did it. Lifestyle shows of every type, but more importantly, play-by-play and that sports talk show that aired every Wednesday night entitled The Sports Connection. Sherry Leapsner, what can I say about her? She is now an attorney, and of course, what she is really known for is her gift of painting and the love of East Liverpool. I'm not so sure if I have more love or respect for anybody in that community like I do her. And I can say this, if she would have never used a paintbrush, she could have been, if not a great attorney, truly one of the best in this business as far as a true journalist covering news. I knew it early on that she had the talent and the grit to do it, and she's never disappointed me, and it's one of the reasons why I'm doing this today. You know, honestly, when I think of East Liverpool, I think of so many things, like Tim Brooks, who first let me broadcast a radio show from the Thompson House, to Frank Dawson, to all the people that I've gotten to know along the way, my broadcast partners, of course, Bill Montgomery, Bob Kelly, and of course, the late Jerry Stovall. And you know, sadly, Bill Montgomery is no longer with us, and because of the way the world is, you have to embrace every day because you just don't know what the next day will bring. And many of the people that I mentioned are sadly no longer here either. And one of them is Frank Mangano. Look, I've said many times the reason I stayed there was to prove Frank how much I loved and respected him. You know, one of the very first things I did was a Christmas Eve broadcast from the then St. Al's, a midnight mass. And I really was kind of not upset about it because I wanted to be back home with my parents. And I was a rough and tough kind of kid, and every once in a while would kind of spit a little fire. So it finally got over, and I was blocked in, and I kept saying, I gotta get out, I gotta get out. So I finally interrupted the mass, and I asked the priest at the time if he would just read this license plate number because it had me blocked in. And he did, and as I was waiting at the station, lo and behold, Frank Mangano came in and he says, okay, who am I blocking in? And I went, it's me, Frank. But we became lifelong friends. When I did my first national televised boxing match as a ring announcer, he was the first to call me. He always congratulated me, always talked to me, gave me confidence, gave me the opportunity to do so much. And I saw him do a whole lot of good too. And I miss him every day. And I've told people this, that every Thanksgiving, except for a few, one of the things that I do if I'm not on the air is make my way to Riverview Cemetery. Why? To pay tribute to Frank Mangano. I love him, I think of him often, and because of Frank, I can't tell you how much I'm in his debt and grateful because of the opportunities that I have had. We'll tell you about one other one real quick. Turcano Farms, which is now a great golf course, was once the training headquarters for Ernie Shavers, who was being managed by a guy by the name of Mr. Gennaro out of Youngstown. They used to run those fields, which is now a golf course, but eventually that farm was bought by Frank. And he completely reconfigured the barn, and we had a big party out there, and I had this speech that I put a lot of time into, and I actually hired someone to help me with it because I wanted to prove to Frank I could do anything, right? So he said, let me see your speech. So Frank had been suffering a little bit. He had had a stroke in recent years, but he was full of life, and he basically edited this thing to the point where it was like I needed to start from scratch. But because I was too proud, and because I loved him, I simply did whatever he said. He said, and here's the part where you pull out $100, and he gave me a $100 bill. And he said, you show it to the crowd. This is what Frank Mangano taught me. So I showed the $100 bill. The crowd went wild, and they laughed. And when we were done, he came over and said, that was a tremendous speech. And he said, oh, by the way, can I have my $100 back? But every time I look at that C note, as we call it, that $100 bill, I think of Frank Mangano, who earned everything the old-fashioned way by going out and really pushing the envelope. Sweat equity, back-breaking work, created an empire because of his hard work. And sadly, he's not here anymore. And, you know, I must tell you, recently Norm Six passed away, and they were on that same basketball team at Newell that won the state championship. And whenever I saw Norm at Six Recycling, I always thought of Frank, and whenever I saw Frank, I thought of Norm. There are so many stories, including some of the best talent anywhere, including the great Kalen Boyd, who is still now working at the Pickle. He was a guy who was a disc jockey of epic proportion. I used to ask him to play certain music for me when I would be headed off to cover a game. And you know, I don't think that guy ever had a record skip on him. He truly is one of the most professional people I've ever worked with. So on behalf of the East Liverpool Historical Society for once again giving me a chance to stroll down memory lane, and Jennifer Barrett, who does incredible work, and I must tell you, please check them out on all of their social media outlets and support them any way you can, because every single cent goes to the future, history, and generations in the great city of East Liverpool. And to my friend Frank Mangano, as he has always said to me, stay humble. And that's what I will do for the rest of my time on this planet. I'm glad I had a little time to talk to you all today, and I hope that you will share this with the world, and especially the East Liverpool alumni, because you truly do all mean so much to me. And stay tuned for all the good from the East Liverpool Historical Society. It's your Pratt Pack, still punching in the home gym in Monaca. Love you, East Liverpool. Remember, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home.